As for some other popular forms of leisure and entertainment in the 19th century, many of them are connected with the city, and new urban lifestyle provided a lot of opportunities for all kinds of entertainments. Some of them were ticketed events, some of them were even available for free. So let's look at some of those opportunities created by the urbanization. So things like public parks, for example. This is a 19th century invention. The idea behind it was to give city dwellers some areas where they could relax closer to nature. So some green areas in the city. Some of them included, I would say, educational parts such as botanic gardens or even zoological gardens, where you could learn something new about plants or animals, or be entertained by, for example, looking at exotic species of plants and animals. So the parks combined pleasure with education, and this is something that is very true about different forms of Victorian leisure activities. They wanted even their leisure to be instructive very often, especially those types of leisure that were aimed at the middle class, at the richer sections of the society. They were supposed not only to be entertaining and pleasurable and thrilling, like, well, they all loved anything modern, anything technological, so I know carousels and such things were very popular, but very often to have this element of education and moral betterment as well. So museums, very popular, and if you look at the fact that some major museums, like the British Museum, were not charging money. They were not ticketed. You could just walk in and learn something about ancient cultures, look at some authentic artwork from all kinds of exotic locations. Well, now, of course, most of these pieces of art are demanded back by the governments of the places where the British took them from. But this is immensely popular area of entertainment. Museums, galleries, art shows, technology shows, this all culminates in the Great Exhibition, of course. So those trade fairs and any kind of shows demonstrating new, fascinating, exotic, or rare objects. This is immensely popular. This is something that basically dominates 19th century entertainment. There might be some other new forms of entertainment, like department stores or window shopping. You could just walk along the street and enjoy watching the products at shop windows. This is a huge thing. This is a new idea, that you can actually walk into a big shop and just browse through the merchandise there without even having to buy anything. If you looked respectable, yeah, absolutely. And then we have all kinds of shows and theatricals catering for any kind of budget, any kind of taste, and some of them are still popular, some of them went out of fashion, some of them have this kind of nostalgic flavor still, so let's look at them probably from the top to the bottom, so the most prestigious and expensive to the least prestigious and expensive. So the opera. The 19th century is the century of the opera, really. The art form was, of course, older. It evolved in Italy somewhere around the 17th or early 18th century, but by the 19th century we have the superstar composers such as Verdi or earlier the bel canto composers like Bellini or Rossini or Donizetti. In the late Victorian period we have Puccini, so most of them are Italians, of course. And we have the first international superstars going on world tours from Russia to America. We have great singers, many of them sopranos, such as Adelina Patti, an Italian diva from a very talented family. She actually retired to Wales after a long, successful career. Or her great rival Christine Nilsson, a Swedish diva, a follower. There was another Swedish diva earlier. Her name was Jenny Lind. So we have those talented women becoming superstars and traveling the world. Of course, it's not only women. The men singers were also sometimes very popular. They became celebrities. Some of them were actually Polish. There was a very talented family of singers called Reszke, the Reszke family. They were actually given the nobility by the Tsar, so they used a kind of French-sounding name, Dereshka. There were two brothers and a sister, and they all had wonderful careers as opera singers, very international careers. So it's not coincidental that many cities in Europe and Britain have either completely new opera houses or refurbished opera houses. They were very important places of entertainment. It was very fashionable for rich families to book a box, so a kind of a yearly ticket with a specified place. With a private box where they could invite guests, they could even eat dinners there or do business and basically spend their evenings. So it wasn't really about the music, it was about the whole entourage. Opera houses were very frequent places of big charity balls, very often fancy dress balls, which were a very popular thing in the 19th century. Generally, people like dressing up, people like playing with clothes. This is one of the ways they did it, private fancy dress balls. Even the balls organized at the royal court. Queen Victoria gave fancy dress balls. There was one called the Plantagenet ball, in which everybody dressed in some sort of quasi-medieval outfit. Then there was the Restoration ball, which was like the late Stuart period, late 17th century, with the fashions from there, and she did it quite a few times, and there are some portraits of Victoria and Albert dressed in the historically inspired costumes. Everybody loved that. When photography became popular, a very popular form of entertainment among the rich classes were the so-called tableaux vivants, so the living pictures. Everybody would dress up in some sort of fancy clothes, or they would arrange some sort of clothes they had to look fancy, and they would pose for a photograph that would either remind of painting or some historical scene or some scene from a legend or literature. So basically this is something extremely popular. So we have the opera as an art form which was very fashionable, and also as a kind of focus of many other forms of entertainment. Then we have, of course, the dramatic theatre. We have some great theatre actors and actresses. Very often they are women, like Ellen Terry or Lily Langtry. Especially Ellen Terry, she was a great Shakespearean actress. There is a portrait of her dressed up in the costume of Lady Macbeth. Very interesting dress, decorated with beetle wings, those kind of shiny, greenish beetle wings. Look it up, Ellen Terry as Lady Macbeth. So people went to the theatre a lot. This is the moment in the 19th century when Shakespeare becomes recognized as the bard, like, you know, the second Bible, the real Bible, and the works of William Shakespeare. This isn't the Victorian idea. Of course, there are some voices that Shakespeare is too naughty for everybody. So there was a man called Thomas Bowdler who edited Shakespeare for the use of children and women and servants, and he published a book called Family Shakespeare. So everything sexual or profane language or any kind of rude jokes were eliminated. So yeah, you could have the Bowdlerized, there is a word like that, Bowdlerized Shakespeare or other classics. Another type of theatres was perhaps the most popular theatre. Yes, Watson coming back. Here. It was called melodrama. The meaning of the term melodrama is slightly different today. In the 19th century, this was a kind of popular theatre, sometimes with music, but not always, with stock characters. So you'd very clearly know from the beginning, from the first glance, who was the hero, who was the villain, who was the comical couple. You would have stock characters very clearly defined, and this was extremely popular. There is a very interesting book called Victorian Melodrama in the Institute Library, where the author investigates like 1,000 of different shows that are now completely forgotten. But the idea behind this formulaic show was very, very popular. Then we have another very popular form of entertainment for, let's say, less sophisticated audience, but not always. They kind of mixed the audiences very much, which was the music hall. Not the musical, not the modern musical theatre, one of the predecessors of the modern musical theatre, called the music hall. It was usually, it developed from some sort of pub performance. So some better, bigger pubs would have a small stage where they would have singers and people doing the so-called specialty numbers. So they would do like maybe a kind of magic trick or a little comical sketch, sometimes even a small group number or a dance number, but mostly songs. There were different types of songs. There were some very popular entertainers. Sometimes they had their own conventions, similar to the Panto convention. So you would have some music hall artists specializing, for example, in dressing up as women and doing some comical numbers as a kind of funny lady. There was one such singer. His name was Dan Leno, and his specialty was dressed up as a woman and do a kind of comical number as a funny working class street seller. So this kind of humor, it was of course very stereotypical, but you have a lot of that. Sometimes they would actually go from one pub to another or one music hall to another during the evening, do their own specialty song, and then move to another pub. So while the audience, very often, more often than not, they would not be seated like in a theater, but they would just sit around the tables and drink beer and socialize and flirt, and there would be quite a lot of audience participation, so they would speak and sing together with the artists. So this was a very, very popular form of show. That was only eclipsed by the arrival of the cinema in the Edwardian period. Before that, the music hall was definitely the most popular form of kind of broad audience theatricals. There are some other things, like the circus. The 19th century is the beginning of the art of modern circus, with acrobats and clowns and trained animals. Very often these were traveling shows. They were especially popular in America, but sometimes they went on international shows as well. For many people this was the first occasion to see, I don't know, a zebra, a camel, a giraffe, so whatever, an elephant. So this was extremely popular, especially in the small towns in the countryside. Also, the magic tricks and the clowns, it all solidifies. So all the kind of stereotypes that you have in your heads about what a clown looks like and what he or she does, or what a magician looks like and what he or she does. This all goes back to the 19th century. Really, this is all Victorian. They invented popular culture, as simple as that. There are some dark sides to it as well. You may have heard, for example, about the freak shows. They were sometimes associated with circuses. They would work as a kind of sideshow. So there was the main circus showing those performers doing, I don't know, magic tricks and juggling and animal trainers and I don't know, knife throwers or whatever. And then near, but not in the main tent or the main building, you would have the show in which for a fee you could watch ill people or people with strange bodies. Very tall, very short, very thin, very fat, exotic looking, or with all kinds of deformations of the body, usually resulting from some sort of illness. There are some films that tackle this problem. This is one of those dark sides of the Victorian culture, and I guess it's still fascinating for many people today. If you are interested, there are some films I could advise you to see. First and foremost, David Lynch's The Elephant Man. This is based on a true story from late 19th century London. It recalls the life of one of the most famous Victorian so-called freaks, called the Elephant Man, because of his bodily deformations. He was a very, very ill young man, and he was rescued. It's still contested a little whether he was such a victim as the good doctor wanted him to be presented as, but he was rescued by one of the great medical doctors of the late 19th century, Dr. Frederick Treves, who took him from a sideshow and transported him to London Hospital to be, well, maybe not cured, it wasn't possible, but at least studied and housed with dignity. This man, his real name was Joseph Merrick. he became a kind of celebrity, and he's still a very well-remembered character of, let's say, the borders of Victorian entertainment. Another similar story happening at the very beginning of the 19th century, retold in the film called Black Venus. The Black Venus. It's about an African woman called Sarah Bartman, who was brought to Europe to be displayed as a savage. She also had, I would say, a rather unusual physical build, especially in Europe. She had rather large buttocks, which were, of course, exotic and so quite fascinating, also sexually, to the public in France and in Britain, where she was displayed. So. These are all, of course, stories of exploitation, of cruelty. Recently, I've seen another film. The title was Man to Man, and it was about second half of the 19th century, a British expedition to Africa who brought back two people, a man and a woman, from the Pygmy tribe. So they were very short black people. Well, the actors weren't that short, but the idea was that they were very different looking from the European scientists, and they were trying to market those people as a missing link, in inverted commas, of course, between the humans and the apes. This is after Darwin, so all kinds of bodily abnormality is very interesting and fascinating to many people. Another, I would say, dark aspect of 19th century entertainment is the use of people coming from exotic, usually tribal cultures in zoological gardens as exhibits. So you would have like an African village among some African animals. So the people dressed up in traditional costumes, or just running around half naked, because this was assumed to be the natural way of life. Some sheds made for them, and the Victorian public coming to the zoo to watch them. Yes, well, I would say it's very problematic. If any of you watched the Victorian slum, there was also a mention of slum tourism. So people from the middle class, from the upper class, going to the poorer districts to watch the poor, like animals in the zoo. So, yes, as you can see, a lot of problems here. That might be interesting for your final essay, perhaps. The last part here, before we move on to to private pleasures, is music. It could be private or public, of course. You have to remember that the Victorians loved music just as any people, but the only way to get music was to have live artists playing the music. Until very late in the 19th century, the first forms of mechanical music, like the gramophones, were invented, and they were immediately very popular, because before that, with the exception perhaps of the kind of mechanical organs that were quite popular at fairs, you would have to have live performers. So music is very popular as a spectator entertainment, so concerts, private or public, but also as an accomplishment, as a social skill. Especially young women from the middle class, but not only, well, most people have some sort of education in music, There are different fashions in the 19th century regarding which instruments were the most popular. There was especially long-lived fashion for pianos, especially because the new form of a piano, not a grand piano, but a smaller upright piano was invented. So the instruments were cheaper and could be fitted into smaller middle-class homes. So it was more or less taken for granted that if you had children, especially teenage children, they should be taught to play the piano, which meant practicing for at least 1 hour a day. There were some other periods. Well, the violin was quite a popular instrument, especially among the working class, and the accordion was popular at times. The harp was popular at times. So we have a lot of music making within the family circle, to entertain private guests, to flirt. It was quite a popular way of flirtation, to play music together or to accompany somebody while singing. Very many people took singing lessons, and they had quite well established musical education. Queen Victoria took lessons in playing the piano and singing. Apparently she had a very good singing voice and she was quite talented. Prince Albert even tried to compose. This was part of the kind of assumed education of civilized, cultured people. There was a great popularity of choirs, church choirs, village choirs, even the choirs organized by employers for the factories and mines, especially popular in Wales. The choral tradition in Wales continues until this day, and was especially visible in the 19th century. This was a very clever way to allow the employees of an industry like coal mining or metalworking to socialize without allowing them to drink, because they would be singing. So yep. So there we have it. But of course, pubs. This is a Victorian invention as well. So they basically invented modern popular culture, modern ideas of entertainment, of urban leisure activities, of sports, of most of that stuff, really. So now the last question remains: what did they do in the evening before the advent of electricity? And we continue in a little while.